Next, let's learn about the left front piece. This piece requires knitting the bamboo shadow pattern underneath. The knitting method for the pattern is the same as before. Similarly, the main color is always carried horizontally. The contrasting color is also wound into a few small bobbins. Overall, we will be doing intarsia knitting. For this piece, we also divide it into section 1 and section 2. Section 1 is started by cable cast on. Then, knit stocking stitch upwards. On this side, you need to decrease on the corresponding rows. When you reach section 2, you need to do underarm decreases. Above, knit even. End with a few rows of sloping shoulder. For the front band side, work short rows. After completing the short rows, the remaining part needs increases on the corresponding rows. After finishing the front band, the top part is the neckline shaping. Next, I will demonstrate the short row and increase method on this side. First, cast on the corresponding knit stitches using the main color, and knit the corresponding stitches for the first row. In the sample, there's no switching colors to knit the pattern. In your actual work, starting from the first row, you need to switch colors at the corresponding position. The first row is knit on the right side. I have already knitted it. The remaining loops are left unworked for now. Continue to the second row. Start with 1 double stitch. Then continue purling. Finish the second row. After finishing, continue to the third row. Start by knitting stitch by stitch. Keep knitting until you reach the double stitch. Knit it. Knit the corresponding stitches. This way, the third row is completed. Continue all the way to the 15th row. Each time you work on the right side, after knitting the double stitch, add a few more stitches. When working on the wrong side, the first stitch is a double stitch. Refer to the chart. Complete the first 15 rows. The 15th row should finish off all the loops from the cast on. After completing the first 15 rows, continue knitting. For this section, you need to increase stitches in some rows. This is a left lifted increase. Please watch me demonstrate the method for the left lifted increase. When there are 2 loops left on the right side, work a left lifted increase. First, knit 1 stitch. Then find the second braid below this loop. Pick up the left strand. Knit 1 stitch. This is the added stitch. The left lifted increase is completed. Finally, knit 1 more stitch. Next, refer to the chart and continue knitting. After finishing all the stitches, join the loops with the back piece left shoulder to bind off. The method is the same as the right shoulder. Finally, use the long tail reserved from the back piece to sew the edge of section 1 of the left front piece to the left side of section 1 of the back piece. Sew the rows together in the same way. Up to this point, the left front piece is also finished. Next, let's learn about the sleeves. The sleeves are divided into the cuff, the sleeve body, and the sleeve cap. They are knitted from bottom to top sequentially. After finishing, sew the sides of the sleeve together. Please watch my demonstration. First, cast on for cuff. Here, alternate between knit and purl stitches. Then, work the twisted rib stitch on the body. Before starting, you can also leave a long yarn tail for sewing. I won't leave one here. When casting on, we treat the first loop as a purl stitch. Start the second stitch with a knit stitch. Then alternate between one knit stitch and one purl stitch. Continue until you have the required number of stitches. After completing the cast on, begin working on the first row. The first row is worked on the right side. First, knit one stitch. Then purl one stitch. Next, knit one twisted stitch. This means inserting the needle through the back loop to knit. For the rest of this row, alternate between one purl stitch and one twisted knit stitch. Follow this pattern to complete the row. Once done, continue with row 2. The first stitch is a knit. Then work one twisted purl stitch. Insert the needle through the back loop to purl. Continue alternating one knit stitch and one twisted purl stitch. The last stitch is a purl. Complete the row. Now, the second row of the sample is finished. Next, you can match the texture below. That means working the same stitches as the texture below. On the right side, the first stitch is always a knit. Then, see a horizontal line, purl. See a twisted braid, knit a twisted stitch. After finishing the right side, on the wrong side, the first stitch is also a knit. Then, see a horizontal line, purl a twisted stitch. Braid, knit. On the wrong side, the last stitch is always a purl. Except the first stitch, from the right side, we will have a column of horizontal lines, alternating with a column of twisted braid stitches. This texture is called twisted rib stitch, when counting rows, starting from this twisted braid. The bottommost braid is formed by cast on. One braid is one row. The loops on the needle also count as one row. Therefore, the sample here has 4 rows. Next, refer to the chart. Finish the section of twisted rib stitch. After finishing, work 2 more rows upwards, which means completing row 15. For these 2 rows, purl on both sides. The left stitch can always maintain a purl texture. The right stitch can always maintain a knit texture. After completing the first 15 rows, I will demonstrate row 16 briefly. This row is worked on the wrong side. First, knit 1 stitch. Then work 1 yarn over, wrap the yarn above the right needle, followed by a purl 2 stitches together, on the wrong side. Therefore, we bring the yarn above the needle. Then insert into both loops from right to left. Work 1 purl stitch, completing the purl 2 stitches together. Working the yarn over is equivalent to increase 1 stitch. Working a P2 tog to decrease 1 stitch. This way, the total stitches remain the same. Continue with 1 yarn over. The yarn was originally above the needle. We need to wrap it again. Then work a purl 2 stitches together. Another yarn over and P2 tog is completed. Next, alternate 1 yarn over and 1 P2 tog. End with 1 purl stitch. Now, row 16 is done. Continue with row 17. The first stitch is a knit. Then, all purl stitches. Work the yarn over stitches as usual. Row 17 is complete. Next, row 18. except for the first stitch. The rest are also continued purl. Row 19 alternates 1 knit and 1 purl stitch. Starting from row 20, you will be working twisted rib stitch again. Refer to the chart and finish the remaining rows of the cuff. After completing the cuff, continue with the sleeve body. The first row requires increasing evenly. When increasing in this row, you will encounter two situations. One situation is where there are horizontal line textures below. Work a right lifted increase. Pick up the right strand and work 1 stitch like this. Then work 1 knit stitch. The right lifted increase is completed. The other situation is with twisted braid textures. Work a right increase, also pick up the right strand. Work 1 knit stitch. Then work a knit stitch with this loop. Next, refer to the chart. Complete the first row of the sleeve body. Continue to work the remaining rows and the sleeve cap. After completing the last row of the sleeve cap, on the right side, work the basic knit bind off. Bind off all the stitches and cut the yarn. This way, the knitting of sleeve is finished. After finishing the knitting of sleeve, sew the both side of cuff and sleeve body together to form a tube. Here, you also sew row by row. After sewing the side of the sleeve, you can fold the sleeve in half. Temporarily secure the middle of the sleeve cap to the shoulder position. Temporarily secure these two sewing positions. Then temporarily secure a few more points on both sides. Then sew the sleeve cap evenly to the armhole position. When sewing, the method is the same as before. You pick up a few strands along the edge and sew them. This way, the sleeve is finished. Next, you need to work along the front band and the bottom edge for the bordure. Then, pick up stitches for the collar at the neckline. Finally, make the buttons. Note: this section is for the bordure. You don't need to pick up stitches for the collar here. Therefore, the starting position for the bordure should be this corner and end at this corner. Please watch me demonstrate the specific bordure method with sample. Everyone can practice after learning. First, leave a long yarn tail for picking up stitches. The yarn tail can be longer, about 3 times of the bordure length. You can also leave more. Wind it into a small bobbin. Mine is shorter here, so I won't wind it. Next, start from the corner of the neckline on the left side. Pick up stitches. Note: use the reserved long yarn tail to pick up. The number of stitches depends on your tension. Ensure it's roughly flat after you finish. The number of stitches for this section is about 30 stitches. You can also adjust based on your tension. Here, it's roughly 1 stitch for every 2 rows, where the curve is more pronounced at the bottom. You can pick up more stitches. In the bottom edge, pick up 9 stitches for every 10 stitches roughly. If you're unsure, you can pick up a segment and then stop. Then start knitting. I'll pick up some stitches first. Then return to the starting position. Cast on 3 stitches with this yarn. Then knit 2 stitches. Next, decrease 1 stitch. You can knit these 2 stitches together at once. Or you can slip 1 stitch knitwise. Then knit 1 stitch. Then pass slipped stitch over. Either of these 2 methods will work. Here, I'll knit these 2 stitches together at once. Next, transfer these 3 loops to the left-hand needle. Knit 2 stitches. Then work K2 tog. Repeat this process. After knitting for a bit, check if the fabric is flat. If the stitch count is obviously too high, you can undo and pick up again. Pick up fewer loops. If the stitch count is obviously too low, pick up more loops when redoing it. When the loops are almost finished, continue using this long yarn tail to pick up stitches. If you are confident, you can pick up all the loops at once. If during the picking up process, the yarn is not long enough, add another piece. Join yarn and pick up stitches. Repeat this process. After picking up, knit until there are 3 loops left. We will work basic, knit, bind off. Bind off the stitches. Leave a tail of about 50 centimeters for finishing. Fasten off normally. Hide the other tail following the texture. This long tail will be used later for crocheting the button loop. That's it, the border is now complete. Next, we'll knit the collar. For the first row, picking up stitches along the edge. Refer to the chart for the number of stitches to pick up. After picking up, you have completed the first row. Next, I will use this sample to explain the remaining rows. Begin knitting the second row. The first stitch is a slip stitch. As a purl stitch, gently tighten. Then alternate knitting one knit and one purl twist. The last stitch is a knit. Complete this row. After completing, continue with the third row. The first stitch is a slip stitch. Slip it up as a purl stitch in the same way. Make sure to slightly tighten when slipping stitches, otherwise the edge will be loose. Then alternate one purl and one knit twist. The last stitch is a knit. After completing, continue with the fourth row. This row is identical to the second row. The first stitch is slipped as a purl. Then work normally. The last stitch is a knit. Next, both the fifth and sixth rows end with short rows. Start with the fifth row. Begin working normally. Continue working until there are 5 loops left at the end. After completing, unwork the remaining 5 stitches. Continue with the 6th row. Work 1 double stitch. Then work normally. At the end, leave 5 stitches unwork. After completing, continue with the 7th row. Start with a double stitch. Then knit. Continue knitting until 2 loops left. After completing, knit 2 stitches together. Then turn the work. Work the 8th row. On the subsequent wrong side rows, slip the first stitch purlwise. This creates a braid-like texture along the edge. Then knit. The ending symbol is a K2 tog. On the wrong side. The 8th row is completed. For the 9th row, start with a slip stitch purlwise. Similarly, ensure that this side also has a braid-like texture. Then follow the chart for the K2 tog and yarn over. The 9th row is completed. Next, continue following the chart. Each row should end with 1 K2 tog. Start each row with slip stitch. After finishing all the rows, you need to bind off an 1 by 1 rib stitch. The first stitch is a slip stitch. Then purl 1 stitch. Pass the first stitch over the second stitch. Then move the yarn to the new position. This means remove the needle, and placing it above the yarn, put it back through the loop. And knit 1 stitch. Pass the first stitch over the second stitch. For each subsequent stitch, move the yarn position before binding off. If the stitch below is a twisted loop, bind off with a purl stitch. If it's a horizontal line, bind off with a knit stitch. Bind off all the loops. Once completed, fasten off the yarn normally. This way, the collar is also finished. Next, let's look at the buttons. There are 2 buttons. One is placed at the top here, and the right neckline is the button loop. The other one is placed at the bottom here, and the pipa button loop on the right front band. It consists of the large and small circular pieces and the button loop. Here on the left front piece is the dragonfly decoration. It is divided into the first part and the second part. Please watch my demonstration. First, use the reserved long yarn tail of the bordure. Crochet the button loop. Insert the hook into the edge stitches. Pull the yarn through. Then crochet 7 chains. The number of chain stitches can be adjusted as needed. Ensure that the button can fit perfectly. The button loop should not be too long. Next, find the second chain from the hook. Pick up the top loop of this chain stitch. Make a slip stitch. The oval shape with a solid dot indicates an untightened slip stitch. Continue picking up the top loop of the chain stitches. Correspondingly make slip stitches. When completed, pick up a few threads along the edge, slip stitch. Then crochet a chain to secure. Pull the yarn tail through. Tighten. Next, use this yarn tail to sew the other end of the button loop. Thread the yarn tail onto a sewing needle. Begin sewing. This way, the top button loop is completed. After completing the button loop, sew a purl button on the other side of the neckline. You can use the main color for sewing. Next, use the corresponding color of yarn. Crochet large and small circles. First, let's learn the method for crocheting the large circle. Start with a magic ring. Then crochet 3 chains. This counts as 1 double crochet. Next, work a double crochet in the magic ring. Continue working double crochets in this loop. Including the beginning chain, crochet a total of 14. With more stitches, after crocheting a few, you can move to the right, continue crocheting. When done, pull tight the starting tail, close the ring. Then pick up the top 2 threads of the beginning chain. Crochet 1 slip stitch. This is the chain stitch on the right side of the double crochet. If you can't find it, just roughly pick up 2 threads and crochet. The solid dot in the circle indicates a slip stitch that needs to be pulled tight. Next, crochet 1 chain to secure. Enlarge the loop. Leave about 15 centimeters of yarn tail. Cut the yarn. Pull tight. The large circular piece is now crocheted. Weave in the starting yarn tail on the wrong side following the texture. Next, using the same method, crochet the smaller circular piece. The smaller circular piece has 2 fewer double crochets than the larger one. At the end, leave about 30 centimeters of yarn tail. Refer to the previous method, and crochet the smaller circular piece as well. After both circular pieces are completed, start crocheting the button loop. Chain 16. The first knot doesn't count as one stitch. Tighten it. This is the first chain. After completing it, find the second chain from the hook. Pick up the top 2 threads. Make a single crochet. Continue make single crochets in the next chain with the top 2 threads. Complete all the remaining chain stitches. After completing it, leave a tail of about 15 centimeters at the end. Hide the short tail on the wrong side following the texture. Next, Sew these 3 parts together. First, use the long yarn tail from the larger circle. Sew the 2 circles together with 3 or 4 stitches. When sewing, note that the side with the clearer texture is the right side. Next, overlap the tail of the button loop, and sew it together. This should be just enough so the hole aligns perfectly with the button. After sewing, secure it to the smaller circle. It should roughly align with this position. This completes the sewing. Finally, sew this onto the cardigan. It should be roughly located at this corner. The button loop should extend about 1 centimeter beyond the edge. Place it horizontally. You can sew it on using the longer yarn tail from the small circle. Try not to leave long visible stitches on the right side. This way, the Pipa button loop is now complete. Next, start crocheting the first part of the dragonfly decoration. Begin with a magic ring. Then make 2 chains. Next, in the magic ring, crochet 1/2 double crochet. You can mark a stitch marker in this half double crochet stitch, which is the 2 strands on the top right. Continue in the ring. Crochet 9 more half double crochets. This means, not counting the beginning chain, you should have crocheted 10 stitches in total. When done, close the magic ring. Join with a slip stitch at the marker position. Move on to crocheting the dragonfly wings. Start by chaining 11. Place a marker on the first chain stitch. This makes it easier to find the entry position later. Then, starting from the second chain to the hook, crochet slip stitches correspondingly. We can similarly crochet through 2 strands, or crochet through 1 strand. The 10th slip stitch should be crocheted in the same chain as the marker. After completing that, crochet 1 chain. Then, in the same entry position of the last slip stitch, which is the marker position, crochet 1 single crochet. Turn your work like this. Continue with 3 entry positions on the left side. And crochet 1 single crochet in each. This is the entry position, where the single crochet was just worked. This is the adjacent entry position on the left side. Crochet 2 more. That makes 4 single crochets. After completing that, for the remaining 6 entry positions, crochet half double crochets correspondingly. After completing that, in the same entry position as the last half double crochet, crochet 4 more half double crochets. After completing that, starting from the next entry position, Crochet 5 half double crochets and 4 single crochets evenly. This should be symmetrical to this side. The entry positions should match the stitch entry positions here. The last single crochet entry position might be a bit hard to find. Just estimate it. After completing that, skip 1 half double crochet, join with a slip stitch in this half double crochet stitch. This stitch is the entry position for the slip stitch. This completes one wing. Continue by slip stitching in the adjacent stitch on the left side. Next, crochet 4 chains. Starting from the second chain stitch, crochet 3 slip stitches correspondingly. Pick up the top 1 or 2 threads. After completing that, slip stitch in the next 2 stitches. Then, crochet another wing. The method is the same as the previous wing. After completing it, you can also place a stitch marker on the first chain stitch. This makes it convenient to find the entry position. After completing that, leave a yarn tail of about 40 centimeters. Fasten off the yarn. Move on to the second part. Start with a magic ring. Work 1 chain. In the magic ring, crochet 8 single crochets. Make a mark on the first single crochet stitch. When done, close the ring. Join with a slip stitch in the first stitch. Crochet 1 wing. Note, this wing has fewer stitches. The crocheting method is the same as the first part of the wing. Refer to the chart and follow the previous demonstration. When done, work 2 slip stitches. This is equivalent to working 3 slip stitches. Then crochet another identical small wing. When done, crochet 1 more slip stitch on the left side. There is still 1 slip stitch left. Work 22 chains. Then start from the second chain from the hook. Make a single crochet with the top of 1 or 2 threads. After completing all, slip stitch into the beginning chain by picking up 2 threads. Leave a yarn tail of about 60 centimeters. Fasten off the yarn. The second part is now completed. Next, using the long yarn tail from the first part, sew a few stitches to connect the 2 parts. After connecting, take a new piece of yarn. Sew a few stitches to hold the entire piece together. Temporarily secure it to the front piece. Let's look at this position. Lay the cardigan flat. Place the right front band on top. The decoration should be level with this area. The tail curves downward. After temporarily securing it, continue using the long yarn tail from the first part. Secure it to the cardigan. You can sew the wing first. Then sew the head. Leave a bit unsewn at the head. Move the yarn to the top. Sew on a purl button. Continue sewing the remaining part. Then use the long yarn tail from the second part. Sew the second part as well. After sewing everything, cut and remove the temporarily secured thread. This way, the button is finished. Up to this point, this cardigan is finished. If you have any questions during the process, don't hesitate to reach us via our website. Susan's Family, supporting your handwork experience, sharing the joy of life. Thank you for watching. See you in the next episode.